Hi, my name is Katie Katsikas-Carr. Welcome to my presentation on the topic of why DEI programs matter more than ever in the modern workplace. It seems like conversations about diversity, equity, and inclusion have become more polarized and controversial than ever. Some organizations are publicly scaling back their DEI efforts, while others are questioning whether these programs are still even necessary. This speech examines why DEI programs matter more now than ever, not as political statements, but as practical strategies for building fair, effective, and competitive workplaces. By looking at the research, workplace realities, and changing workforce expectations, we can better understand why DEI remains a critical part of the modern business environment. This presentation will cover the following topics: defining DEI, what is DEI, the evolution of DEI perception, the power of inclusion, and final takeaways. It feels like the term DEI is showing up everywhere. It's become a headline topic, a political talking point, and a phrase that sparks many different opinions. And the current political climate has turned diversity, equity, and inclusion into something controversial in ways it wasn't just a few years ago. For this presentation, I want to unpack what DEI actually means, where the concept come from, and why these initiatives matter in real workplaces. Let's look at how these programs affect employees, companies, and outcomes. By breaking down the term and looking at the research, we can better understand why DEI remains relevant and arguably more important now than ever. And when we talk about DEI, we are referring to diversity, equity, and inclusion. At its core, it's a framework that helps organizations build workplaces that feel fair and welcoming to all of the people in them. Let's briefly explore the history of the term and its relevance in the modern workplace. The term DEI has its roots in social justice movements of the 1950s and 60s in the United States and other countries like the UK. This was a period marked by a push for civil, equal rights and non-discrimination, primarily based around the injustices being witnessed in these societies, particularly around issues of race and gender inequalities, such as segregation, voting access to housing and other resources, and other basic human rights. An essential part of this continuing movement for greater representation, equality, equity, and inclusion has been the increasing realization that businesses and organizations and their employees are part of and have a responsibility to society in general. One way to think about it comes from Foslin and Duffy, who explain that diversity is having a seat at the table, inclusion is having a voice, and equity is having that voice be heard. DEI programs give companies structure. They set goals, define expectations, and help employees understand what fairness and belonging looks like in that specific workplace. This can be seen in hiring and recruiting practices, employee research groups, staff trainings, leadership development, and even how communication works across teams. Public attitudes towards DEI have been shifting dramatically over the past few years. For some, it has become reduced to surface level gestures or branding rather than meaningful structural change. As Rankin points out, too often people reduce this work to checklists or gestures, like wearing pink t shirts for a month or putting a black square on LinkedIn during the Black History Month. But does that improve anyone's life? This criticism reflects frustration that DEI initiatives can appear symbolic rather than impactful. And let's explore how these conversations are evolving and why it matters. DEI has unfortunately become politically polarized. Opponents argue that DEI has become ideological and divisive, while supporters say this framing ignores persistent inequality. Political leaders have amplified these critiques, emphasizing a merit only viewpoint. During a public speech criticizing DEI, President Donald Trump argued that whether you're a doctor, an accountant, or an air traffic controller, you should be hired and promoted based on skill and competence, not race or gender. When this opinion comes from the leader of the nation, it underlies the idea that it is not the role of employers to address these societal inequalities. With this, many may view DEI as prioritizing identity over merit. Additionally, some may distrust those initiatives if they believe that the outcomes are predetermined by bias towards marginalized community. On the other hand, critics may feel like DEI does not go far enough and appears performative. If the program seems symbolic without addressing true systemic issues, they're not going to be taken seriously by employees, customers, or stakeholders. And when we look at the research, we find that inclusion actually helps business at the bottom line. When people feel like they belong and their ideas matter, the data consistently shows that it improves performance and makes organizations stronger. It isn't about the politics, it's about belonging. And that's something we just can't take for granted. Beyond the moral and social case for DEI, there's a strong business case for it as well. In today's competitive world, businesses depend on innovation and adaptability. These qualities grow when a wider range of perspective and backgrounds are present. Research consistently shows that inclusion is not just a social value, but a performance driver. A major study by McKinsey and Company illustrates this clearly. Companies in the top quartile for gender diversity on executive teams were 25% more likely to experience above average profitability. And in contrast, organizations that lag on representation are not just maintaining the status quo, but losing ground. McKinsey also notes that companies in the bottom quartile for gender and ethnic diversity continue to underperform. Additionally, diverse and inclusive organizations are 70% more likely to capture new markets. These findings suggest that exclusion carries a cost. As the workforce becomes more diverse and more global, companies that fail to create inclusive environments risk reduced innovation, weaker decision making, and lower competitiveness. DEI initiatives provide an ethical framework and a business strategy that helps organizations remain relevant in this changing world. In conclusion, DEI is not a dirty word. It's a framework for fairness, belonging, and opportunity in the workplace. The controversy surrounding it is real, and it hasn't come out of nowhere. Politics, polarization, and misconceptions about DEI have made it an easy target in public debate. A lot of skepticism comes from misunderstandings about merit, advantage, and whether companies should play a role in addressing inequality. When we look at the data, the story is clear. Diverse and inclusive organizations outperform their peers and are better positioned to innovate and compete in a global market. The goal of DEI is to create environments where more people can contribute, and that makes for a stronger organization from the inside out. DEI remains relevant because workplaces need to be resilient, competitive, and human centered in today's world. If we want organizations that reflect the world we live in and that perform at their best, then DEI is not just useful, it's necessary. Thank you.